This one's a classic.
Equipment in old MapleStory, as we know, tends to be fairly scattered in terms of practicality. Some of the most egregious examples are the weird glove meta and the maple weapons, as we've discussed in previous videos.
Maple weapons.
Today I want to take a look at yet another equipment slot that was compromised by weird design choices and ultimately became a bit confusing because of these design choices. Before we get into it, let's talk about Fortune Mill, an incremental idler game where you have to escape from a factory by progressing through rooms, becoming a millionaire in each. As you pay off the guys blocking your path, you unlock access to new minigames, each of which has a ton of upgrades and augments. This, of course, helps push you even further, with little guys helping you out along the way. Most of my channel consists of progression content. I just love this gameplay loop of satisfying number go up, and Fortune Mill does this extremely well. Each room has upgrades that boost other rooms, and you can travel between them as you unlock access. And eventually, it becomes a connected system of every room helping the others as you work your way to freedom. There are no ads and no microtransactions. Fortune Mill is just a single purchase to unlock the full game. iPhone enjoyers can scan the QR code on screen to download Fortune Mill from the App Store for free, and it's also available on Steam. If we're talking the very early days, during the GMS beta or even the KMS and JMS pre-Osiria era, shoes were uninteresting. Basically, just get the level 60 shoes for your class and wear those. The most you could hope for was scrolling them for decks with shoe jump scrolls. Warriors were also probably using scrolls for shoes for decks, which ironically don't actually give decks, as confusing as that is. They give straight accuracy, which is more valuable per point if the only goal is accuracy. But back during this era, I genuinely just wouldn't be surprised if it was actually viable to scroll shoes for speed. Who knows what people were doing that far back? This scroll ambiguity always struck me as particularly weird. It's one of those odd design choices that I mentioned that could make scrolling potentially confusing, an already unnecessarily complex system that now also forced you to contend with random obfuscation. Because why would the scroll that has dex in the name not be the scroll that increases dex? Because it's a secret why. But let's jump forward a bit to the full release of GMS, when we were given access to Orbis and Elnath immediately upon release. In the Elnath armor store, there were a set of snowshoes available for every class. After version 62's pirate release, they were also given their own pair of snowshoes. Much like the gloves of old school MapleStory, every pair of shoes in the game had 5 slots. That was simply the standard. These snowshoes broke that rule, and they instead had 7 slots. If there's anything we've learned from our discussion about gloves, it's that extra slots greatly increases the value of the item, since the ceiling for scrolling it becomes higher. On top of that, snowshoes had a passive effect that removed the character's acceleration and deceleration time when walking. This is the big friction mode where you couldn't slide around at all. It was most noticeable in El Nath, where the ground was slippery, but it actually applied everywhere in the game. There's a small amount of acceleration and deceleration applied to movement even outside of El Nath's snowy regions, and I'm unsure whether this is common knowledge or not. Eventually, this passive snowshoe effect would be given to a scroll that could then be applied to any pair of shoes in the game, but those were added in version 56, which is a decent bit after this period of time. These snowshoes were absolutely meta-defining, but in a different capacity than the extremely valuable 7-slot gloves. Since these snowshoes could be purchased infinitely from a shop for very cheap, they actually weren't valuable unless they were scrolled well. So, unlike Stormcaster gloves, for example, where they operated on a bit of an inverted bell curve of value as their weapon attack increased, snowshoes saw more of a traditional linear increase in value as they were scrolled. And essentially, this just made them more accessible. Players could more easily find a pair that fit within their budget. For a time, it was nearly impossible to find anyone in MapleStory not wearing snowshoes. Their level 30 requirement, their accessibility, El Nath being the endgame training area for quite a long time. All of these factors contributed to the dominance of snowshoes in the meta, but they just couldn't win out forever. For some classes, especially your dexless assassins, they could get away with rocking well-scrolled snowshoes pretty much indefinitely, as the lack of requirements and increase in dex was very important for gearing their characters. But a lot of time, players would eventually switch over to high-level options instead. In a world where El Nath doesn't dominate the training meta, there was less incentive to have access to big friction on your shoes, so people turned to the 5-slot options that came with high base stats. This is again very similar to what we saw with gloves. We weren't dealing with weapon attack here though. In fact, the only stat that could be directly added to shoes at this point in time was dex, which most classes used, so the concepts behind this were a lot simpler. It was, for a long time, just impossible to add weapon attack to shoes through scrolls. So while the 7 slots on snowshoes was nice, it was not as massively impactful as those extra slots were when put on gloves. Much like gloves, though, there were some other options for shoes. Some of these really aren't practical or useful in major ways, but they are worth mentioning. For example, the Christmas socks. These were added very late in the pre-Big Bang era, being released on December 10th, 2009 in version 80. They weren't really based on any existing pieces of armor, but they functioned similarly to the colored work gloves and all-class markers. Some of them gave stats, they all had 7 slots, were equipable as early as level 10, and were only obtainable during the event. The red and green Christmas socks are the standouts among them. Giving weapon attack and magic attack directly, these were some of the only shoes in the game to ever have these stats pre-Big Bang. Chaos scrolling was far more prevalent by this point in time as well, so high attack red Christmas socks were not unheard of. Green Christmas socks were still less sought after, especially considering that the damage formula treats int as basically magic attack plus. So white Christmas socks that gave int were still technically better, albeit only marginally so. Then you have some low-level options that I only really mention due to their legacy, let's say. White bottom shoes, for example, requiring level 26 and being purchasable for no more than 15,000 mesos, these shoes gave +3 speed and came in a variety of colors. It was a neat early game customization option and one of the few pieces of non-cash shop gear that actually looks kind of good. Plus, that 3 speed would likely be enough to help you jump over to the 3rd sewer opening in Kerning City while you waited to join a PQ. Meaning, they were practical. You could show off better. Speaking of Kerning PQ, the squishy shoes were added as a random drop from King Slime in version 67, the same update as the monster book system and the family system. Again, these shoes only give +1 to every stat, and they only have 5 slots. They were mostly a trophy item rather than a practical piece of gear, since even the most basic scrolled snowshoes would outperform these pretty easily. It was not uncommon to find them on early second job characters though. Then there were the snowshoe recolors, yellow snowshoes and violet snowshoes. Violet snowshoes were a drop from the Yakuza boss, which was not something that was farmed all that often. Even when they did drop, they were nothing special, providing nothing of particular interest or value. This was mostly another trophy item. The yellow snowshoes, however, were valuable. Magicians never really received a strong pair of shoes at any point in the game, so a pair of level 50 snowshoes that came clean with up to 3 int and required no stats was great for the huge number of luckless magicians in the game, just the majority of the magician population. There was little to no upgrade path for these though, since we're still talking about an era where Dex was the only stat that could be added to shoes. But it gave luckless magicians something. Maybe they can chaos scroll it. That's pretty cheap. There was one more snowshoe reskin that was released, and it's arguably the one pair of shoes that really matter in this conversation. Facestompers. Added in version 51, these were the first pair of shoes added to GMS to have weapon attack as one of their base stats. These were crafted in NLC. They were all class, only requiring level 50. Much like the Stormcaster gloves, these shoes dominated the meta immediately. It really did not matter at all that they only had 5 slots. 2 weapon attack was so powerful that it literally cleared every other pair of shoes in the game simply by existing. No scrolling was even required. You just could not find a pair of shoes that came with enough stats clean to outdo Facestompers. Since they weren't limited to events or time restricted in any way, Facestompers were now the only shoes that players cared about as an endgame choice. Even one good Chaos Scroll roll of like +4 would skyrocket the value of these shoes way beyond what any other shoes in the game could ever hope to achieve. Snowshoes became obsolete. High-level, class-specific shoes became obsolete. Everyone wanted Facestompers because they were so insanely powerful, except for the poor magicians who didn't benefit from their existence in any way. Much in the same way Stormcaster gloves dominated the meta with their release, Facestompers did the same, but on an elevated level. Brown work gloves and yellow markers were still technically king of gloves, but Facestompers had no such opposition. Any player could buy a clean pair, and it would immediately be better than the highest level clean shoes they could find anywhere else. The only concern being they now had to scroll it if they wanted to upgrade it. And with this inverted bell curve value path similar to Stormcaster gloves, with the far end being billions upon billions of mesos, throwing shoe jump scrolls on these felt almost disrespectful. So they found themselves in a weird state, where only the Omega rich and the risk takers were willing to gamble with them, while everyone else kind of settled for keeping them clean or losing out on a lot of potential value by scrolling them with anything other than Chaos Scrolls. In version 80, 10%, 60%, and 100% scrolls for shoes for weapon attack were finally added. They were extremely valuable, of course, but their addition finally killed the Facestomper dominance. High-level shoes could now be scrolled for weapon attack while retaining their original stat increases without any concern of using those risky and extremely expensive Chaos Scrolls. A couple bad rolls with a Chaos Scroll, you were bankrupt. A couple bad rolls with shoe attack scrolls, devastating, but far less so. It also meant that 7-slot shoes were now king once more. 10% shoe attack scrolls gave 3 weapon attack, so even 1 extra slot over Facestompers was already technically an improvement. We're now, theoretically, talking about shoes that could reach 8 attack before falling down to the Facestompers' measly 5 slots. It's hard to overstate how valuable weapon attack is. That 6 attack difference is way more impactful than it may seem. Just trust me on that. So the shoe meta definitely took a different turn when compared with the glove meta. While Stormcasters and 7-slot gloves remained the dominant force until the entire gearing meta changed, Facestompers kind of came and went. They had their time, but it was short-lived. All it took was the release of a single scroll to completely invalidate their overinflated position in the economy. And that overinflated value was so extreme that it barely even mattered that they came with weapon attack. They're still an iconic piece of gear, of course. Their legacy will never be forgotten, even if they're no longer obtainable in GMS.